Now, this weekend, the people of Japan will be remembering the earthquake and the tsunami which devastated coastal regions of their country exactly a year ago. All around the world, others are remembering too, but for different reasons. The damage to the Fukushima nuclear plant helped convince Germany's government, among others, that even a new generation of nuclear power is not right for them. Britain paused for a moment and then decided to press ahead in cooperation with France. In a moment, we'll hear about the scientific fears over nuclear power. First, here's Paul Mason with a different worry: cost.
Earthquake, tsunami, generator failure and meltdown. The nuclear disaster at Fukushima has left us with indelible images and, in Japan itself, a massive psychological and political change. 1 year on, it's become clear that Fukushima may also change the course of energy policy around the world, including here. The economic cost of Fukushima has been huge. TEPCO, the company that runs it, posted a £5 billion loss this year. It expects the Japanese government to provide a £7 billion bailout to stay afloat. But the company is being sued for £42 billion in damages. Meanwhile, 52 out of Japan's 54 reactors remain shut down, and the cost of importing energy has helped create a record trade deficit. And, as Japan's economy minister said last night, the country is now preparing for a zero nuclear energy summer.
As for how many reactors will be operational this summer, we're currently checking their safety now. The first of those will be decided at the end of March. But without seeing that, it's impossible to say whether it will be 0 reactors, 1 or 2, or perhaps even more.
Fukushima set off a chain reaction in energy policy across the world. Germany decided to quit nuclear within 10 years. In other countries, the construction of new nuclear power stations has slowed, and that's now impacting on Britain's decision to build a whole new wave of nuclear power stations here. The UK is committed to build a whole new wave of nuclear power stations. EDF, the French government-owned company, stands ready to build 4 reactors. But the project is reliant on how the government sets the future price of nuclear-generated electricity. Trouble building the new-style reactors in France, technical trouble and political trouble. And some say Fukushima has changed the economics.
Well, what it really does is it gets everybody to focus on who is going to carry the risks involved in a new nuclear power station. And basically, what is now intended would transfer all of the risk from essentially the French government to the British homeowners and British businesses, because only something with the backing of a government, a company with the backing of government, will be able to finance new nuclear power stations. And in order for the British government to get the French government to do it, it will basically have to place an unacceptable burden on British homeowners, British consumers, and that's exactly what electricity market reform is intended to do.
At Greenpeace HQ, they've had a hard time holding the anti-nuclear line. Some climate campaigners have come around to accepting new nuclear as a stopgap to avoid bringing more gas power online. But Fukushima has strengthened the anti-nuclear argument.
In order to deliver new nuclear, the taxpayer has got to be effectively subsidising nuclear to a colossal extent. The current limit on liability if there were an accident like Fukushima would be £1 billion. Now consider EDF, the lead nuclear developer, has a turnover of €63 billion last year, and after compensating for £1 billion would then be able to walk away, and the taxpayer picks up the bill in the event of an accident like that. Now that's a massive taxpayer bung to allow these nuclear power stations to operate, because if commercial people were insuring it, it simply couldn't happen.
John Hutton was the man who, as business secretary, set the new nuclear deal in motion. Now, as Lord Hutton, he's the chairman of the Nuclear Industry Association.
I'm absolutely confident that in the right conditions, with the right reforms to our electricity market, which are being discussed at the moment, we can make a very significant and cost-effective contribution to decarbonising the electricity generating system here in the UK. And we've really got to do this. You know, at the end of the day, if it's not going to be nuclear, what's it going to be? It's going to be fossil fuels. It's going to be more carbon being burnt. And we've got a real problem if we go down that path. So I believe nuclear has to be part of the mix. And in the UK at the moment, there's still very strong support for nuclear playing that role.
Here's the basic problem. In the countries heavily committed to nuclear, whether it's France, China or Russia, the energy industry tends to be either state-owned or state-directed. Britain's new nuclear programme is reliant on the market, and as we're finding, the market is global and unpredictable. And while politicians are committed to nuclear and renewables and low carbon, consumers are not committed to the high energy bills that come with this, so the Fukushima effect may not be over yet.
Paul Mason there, our science editor, Susan Watts, is here. How do you think the accident of Fukushima has really changed nuclear and the way nuclear is seen around the world?
Well, I think those dramatic TV pictures of the explosions at Fukushima really changed the whole of the risk landscape for nuclear power. So not just the safety risk, but the financial risk and the political risk. So on safety, the industry will say we're in a much better place now than we were before Fukushima. We have these ongoing stress tests on reactors. New nuclear power stations are safer, inherently safer, and they will have to pay greater attention to things like backup power supplies and flood risks, which were the key lessons from Fukushima. But it's a complex picture. Probabilistic risk assessment is the technical phrase for it. And interestingly, I think we are now seeing some of even the most experienced experts, the wiser heads, if you like, saying that what Fukushima really showed was that low probability, high risk events can happen. Now, where those before would have been put outside what's called the design base, power stations wouldn't have been built to cope with those. Now they will have to be built to cope with those. And that, of course, adds to the bill for people like EDF who want to build new nuclear power stations.
Well, that's the scientific risks. What about the political risks? Because no political party, no government wants the lights to go off.
Well, Vincent de Rivas, the Chief Executive Officer of EDF, is very fond of saying he's an investor in waiting, and he's having to be a very patient man over this. I think there are still political risks. I know the government is being warned about the risk, for example, of handing a part of our energy mix, effectively the control over that, to the French government. EDF is a largely French government-owned company, and at the same time as saying that we need to be energy independent, we need to be independent of foreign governments.
Susan, thanks very much. Well, I'm joined now by the writer George Monbiot, who reluctantly came out in favour of nuclear power as a way to help counter climate change, Camilla Berens of Stop New Nuclear, and Malcolm Grimston of Chatham House, who's in favour of a new nuclear programme. George Monbiot first. George, isn't it a big gamble for you to claim that the benefits on climate change outweigh the risks of another Fukushima, which could be absolutely catastrophic?
Well, let's look at how catastrophic Fukushima was. As far as we know, no one has yet received a lethal dose of radiation from Fukushima. The worst nuclear accident which has ever taken place, Chernobyl, according to the UN Scientific Committee, which gets an overview of the evidence, killed 28 people and will probably kill some tens or possibly hundreds more. Now, every week, the Chinese coal industry alone kills 42 people in underground accidents.
Right.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of people die as a result of coal pollution
Sorry to interrupt,
inhalation.
but Fukushima, according to the Japanese government, is going to cost $257 billion to clean up, and that's one accident at one place. So while you're right on the fatality figures, just the overall cost is mind-boggling.
It's nothing by comparison to the cost of climate change. The costs of climate change, which are the real uninsured liability that we face, outweigh that many, many times over, orders of magnitude difference, and they are potentially existential costs for humanity. They threaten whole populations, they threaten whole areas of the planet in a way which nuclear power doesn't do in anything like the same scale.
Okay, let me bring in Camilla Berens here, because I take it you agree broadly with what he has to say about climate change. Why don't you agree with him on nuclear?
Well, essentially, I think George's environmental hand-wringing is getting a bit tiresome. The elephant in the room is the fact, do we have an alternative to nuclear? And the honest answer is yes, we do. And the premise is we have the UK and Germany. Two countries that have governments with very similar political outlooks, but are poles apart when it comes to their outlook on energy. We have in the UK...
Well, but hold on, you said alternatives though. What is the alternative?
Well,
what is the
I'm coming to that. Yeah. I'm coming to that. The government is telling us in the UK that we need, to combat climate change, we need an energy mix that has nuclear involved in it. Nuclear is an industry that has a very toxic byproduct, and in the 60 years that it's been going, it has never been economically viable without massive public subsidies.
What is the alternative?
What is the alternative? So Germany is not only committing to phasing out nuclear power in the next 10 years, but it's just produced what they are calling is a blueprint for a sustainable future, which pours massive investment into renewables. It really focuses on a framework for energy reduction, which our government is paying lip service to, but isn't actually acting on. And they're using a technology called combined heat and power. Now, those three things together are going to create a situation where they will be on target with their carbon reduction commitments, and they won't have the legacy of toxic waste that nobody knows what to do with, and the shadow of another Fukushima hanging over our heads.
Malcolm Grimson, there is an alternative. The German government is one of many governments which are thinking again about this, and they are in a very similar position to us. Why are they wrong and we're right?
Let's be clear what's happening in Germany. Germany has plans on the table for 25 new coal-fired power stations. Most of those plants will actually not even be using black coal, which is bad enough. They'll be using brown coal, which is about 50% worse in greenhouse gas emissions than coal.
I would have to
just because someone has produced a report.
There's no evidence to suggest that those coal-fired stations... Combined heat and power is the technology. They're subsidising it. They're putting in tax breaks to drive that technology, which is a lot cleaner.
We've seen these plans, plans of that nature for something like 30 years, and the difficulty is that just because an enthusiast produces a report does not mean
it's a government
that the problem. And the only way that Germany can fulfil these things is if they repeal the second law of thermodynamics, which I think is part of German, seems to be part of German.
You're saying this is all, you know, fantasy wind farms and fantasy calculations, but one of the problems with the nuclear industry from the very start is that you've also lived in fantasy land. Right in the start, in the 1950s, you told us we'd have electricity too cheap to meter. We are still waiting for it.
Well, I mean, I stress I don't work for the nuclear industry.
You did.
There was one very foolish comment from the States. You're quite right with that. The first paper in the UK, the Command paper published in 1954, said that nuclear energy would be about 30% more expensive than coal-fired electricity at the time. So it's possible to get carried away. But you're quite right. The nuclear industry does not have a good record at all of delivering plants to time and cost, and that's the biggest challenge they need to overcome.
Just let me bring in George Monbiot in a second.
Subsidising it massively.
Okay, George Monbiot, you used to go along with that argument on the economics of it, didn't you? Even though you've been very clear on climate change, the economics are still very, very dodgy.
Unfortunately, that's the same thing with most of the alternatives that we want to develop. They all take a long time, and they all turn out, if they're rolled out at scale, to be expensive. And the problem is that if we shut down our nuclear program, and if other countries shut down their nuclear programs, renewables then have to fill two gaps. They have to replace fossil fuels, which I think everybody in this discussion wants to see happening, but they also have to replace nuclear power. Now, it's hard enough to get enough renewables on the table quickly enough to replace fossil fuels in order to prevent runaway climate change from taking place.
Why combined heat and power is an essential bridging technology.
If combined heat and power is making use of fossil fuels, which
with half the carbon footprint,
exactly,
and it's only bridging technology.
Camilla, half the carbon footprint of fossil fuels is still twice or three times as much.
Let's look at the time scale, because
sorry, just let me finish.
Just let me finish. Get you back in.
It's still twice or three times or more as much carbon dioxide as we should be producing if we're to come in under 2 degrees of warming.
Let's look at the time scale. It's very important to realise that you can't build a nuclear power plant overnight.
You can't do any of this overnight.
The 2 EPR reactors that are currently being built are way over schedule, way over budget. It will take 10 years before we have anything up and running. They're not a proven technology, they're not tried and tested, we don't know if they'll actually work efficiently once they are running. So
okay, but once you start it, you can bring nuclear plants on very quickly. In the mid-1980s, just for one moment, if I could please, that in the mid-80s we were bringing on 30 or 40 plants a year in that period of time, and that was with a technology which was much more resource intensive than today's stations. But to take wind, for example, we've just had a string of reports from places like Denmark, from Scotland, from Ireland, from Colorado, showing that because of the inefficiency you introduce into your coal plants by having to crank them up and down, means if you're doing that, the average amount of carbon dioxide proves that. It means that wind actually increases the amount of carbon dioxide, not reducing it.
Have you got no worries about this being French technology? That this is, I mean, you know, we've got a choice between it appears Russian gas, Saudi oil, or French technology on nuclear plants. Well, no. I mean, is that fine as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems with the last time nuclear ran was we didn't have international design. You say French technology, but they're being built in China at the moment. There are EPRs going up in China. The AP1000 is also being built in China as well as being developed for other countries.
But not under free market conditions.
Well,
not under free market
but
conditions.
Let's be clear that at the moment, actually, with the exception of insurance for big accident, which is a fair point, nuclear energy is the only one that's not subsidised. The fossil fuels are massively subsidised because of the atmospheric patterns of pouring carbon dioxide.
That's an
in wind, we
statement.
just saw Scottish Power.
So self-evident
when Scottish Power were threatened,
bills are going up
when Scottish Power were threatened that their subsidy would be cut from 200% to 195% on wind farms, they said they wouldn't build them.
Brief final word to George Monbiot.
Yes, it is absurd to say that we can deal with climate change by technologies like combined heat and power, which are still burning fossil fuels.
Well, you don't know what you're talking about, George. If Germany can do it, why the hell can't we? Just let me finish, Camilla, please. Please just let me finish. Which are pushing us beyond 2 degrees, which is this crucial point, 2 degrees of extra global warming. Okay. If Germany can do it, why can't we?
Well, they're going to push us beyond 2 degrees by getting out of nuclear and into combined heat and power.
Thank you all very much.